Our country from the dawn of time, and is presenting itself over and over again as a problem. And I'm going to read a lot of this article, so I do ask that you bear with me as we go through this, because I also want to talk about intergenerational trauma, the impact that it has had on Indigenous people, and I guess the fact that we don't seem to understand how this trauma has manifested itself through generations and how it impacts families to this very day. And because we are unable to understand its impact and how it's affecting families, we are reluctant to find appropriate solutions for this ever recurring problem. So the article is called "When Culture, Kinship and Foster Care Collide, the Fallout Can Be Deadly." And this is a great example, and I do congratulate Christine Middup for having written this article. It's a fabulous article. You can get hold of the Weekend Australia and have a look at this, please do. So I'm going to go through the article, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about, as we go through it, some of the salient points. So this is the article, and I will bring it up so you can read it just a little bit clearer. Right, so I've highlighted a stack of points here that I think it should be. So I'm just going to go through this. So please bear with me, because this is an important conversation. This is an important conversation in terms of the voice, what the voice means, and about eradicating, or at least improving, if we can't eradicate, at least improving some of these circumstances that we now experience and are being brought to our attention as a result of Albanese's constitutional change and the voice. It should be remarkable, this family portrait, which is the one that was above, which I don't know whether you can see there, of this family. But when you know how these children came to be here and what happened next, you will want to freeze it, rewind time, and start again. But where to begin? The significant issues facing these siblings didn't start in the months or years before this snap was taken. They started, well, actually, before they were born. The little tot asleep at the end of the bed is Benny. He came to this family a couple of years later as a newborn baby with his sister Millie, then a toddler. She's the little girl in pink, staring intently at the book. When distraught child protection workers called Marie to collect her, Millie had sores all over her body and pus coming from both ears. She was inconsolable as her big sister Jess tries to soothe her. The other thing you notice about this photograph is that the 4 siblings are Indigenous and their foster mum is not. Beyond the horizons of that serene family photo was a complex world mired in legacy of intergenerational trauma, stained with poverty, alcohol, homelessness and abuse. When Tom and Marie agreed to care for these children, they had no idea just how difficult it would be and how little support they would receive. And so, in all the expert reports and departmental reviews, followed by an inquest into Yakamura's death last year that found many failings in the system, Marie and Tom kept wondering when some other truths would be aired, not to apportion blame, but to understand. They didn't doubt the children's birth family dearly loved their kids, but how was it that they were unable to provide even the most basic care and protection? Is it enough to couch these issues as post-colonial trauma and move on? Is there another way to break the cycle and close the gap? And I guess, everybody, that's the question I'm asking as I read through this. Do you think that there are other ways by which we could have addressed the issues that I'll explain to you in a moment, this family experienced, and whether or not there's an opportunity to be able to close the gap? I believe there is, providing we note that there are issues here that need to be addressed. There is no doubt that the system failed Yakamura. They wrote in an impassioned letter to the coroner, but the prenatal, postnatal and childhood trauma he suffered with his family is an important part of the history, and to ignore it is dismissive and insulting to his memory. Tom is a teacher who occupies a senior role, and Marie is an experienced health worker. They've been haunted by some of the things they'd seen over their decades of working at the coalface in the top-end communities. Quote, "The reality is there are children living in extreme, disturbing circumstances, and people really don't know. Unless you see it yourself, you don't know," Tom says. They knew they would likely be allocated Indigenous children. Even now, 91% of kids in the Northern Territory Child Protection System are Aboriginal, a figure itself which is absolutely disgraceful. The new foster parents knew little about the children's history other than that they had been through about 5 foster care or kinship placements that hadn't worked out in the preceding year. Territory families did not undertake any assessment of their psychological or medical needs and acknowledged oversight, but it was immediately obvious that both children were highly traumatised. The issue here, I think, is that Indigenous kids are often thought of as being, and this is really sad, I reckon, because Indigenous kids are often thought as being lesser than. Their parents are thought as being lesser than. They're not seen significant. Even in this country today, some 200 years after colonialisation, we still see these Indigenous people as terra nullius. And I find this absolutely, when I say it, I feel emotional because it is so wrong that we see any individual as being insignificant, not worthy of assistance, not worthy of help. And this is the way our governments have been since 1901. We do not care enough about Indigenous people to make their lives better. We took away their land, we killed them, we wanted to eradicate their culture, and by doing so, we destroyed their soul. And I think that it's about time we came to realise these facts and to make the changes that are necessary. The new foster parents knew little about the children's history, other than that they had been through about 5 foster families. I think I read all that. Territory families did not undertake. This is the other thing, they didn't do any assessments. There were nightmares. They would barricade themselves in their bed surrounded by pillows. The kids had all the terror inside them, Marie said. In her statement to the inquest, Amala, their mother, remembers the day when her children were taken without her knowledge. "I had been locked up by police in the morning and was not let out until late in the afternoon. When I looked for my children in the afternoon, they were not there. I was told later that Territory families flew a plane into a community and picked the children up. I was very mad about this, and I think all parents could understand how she must have felt." Amelia's parents, speaking to the Western Australian this week, called this moment, "They came in and took the children and didn't tell us. If someone takes your kids, they should let you know," the grandfather says. From the outset, Tom and Marie were told they should have no contact with the biological family. Indeed, they understood that the parents hadn't wanted the children with non-Indigenous carers. Nevertheless, they wanted to meet the birth parents to assure them that we are good people. The hardest thing for the parents was that we weren't Aboriginal people, Marie says. We knew that Aboriginal children should be with Aboriginal families. We wanted to look the parents in the eyes and say, "We sincerely are not taking your children. We want to stand beside you and help you until you're all right, and then we will stand back. For as long as you need us in these kids' lives, we will be there." Tom adds, "We knew we couldn't bring up these kids on our own. We knew that. We needed their family with us. We needed to include their healing in this process. We needed for these kids to share in knowledge and story time and culture." And when one thinks about that, and you hear later on how the foster parents were treated by the coroner's inquest and blamed for many things, you just wonder what in the fuck's going on. And so a unique bond developed between the foster parents and the biological parents, who were welcome to visit whenever they were sober. On Sundays, we'd have all the family. We'd have grandma and grandpa. We actually supported the whole family in a lot of ways, Marie says. If they needed a feed, wanted a shower, they knew they could just come. We made sure we were always there, that this was a safe place for all the family. The children's mother, Amala, confirmed this in a statement to the inquest. "I thought the children, being with Tom and Marie, would be a good thing if they could not live with me. I would sometimes stay with them without Territory families knowing. This helped me stay close with the children so they could get to know me very well. We were like a big family. Their plea for help largely went unanswered. They needed respite, particularly from Yakamara. This is the foster parents, but they struggled to get it. They needed proper ongoing psychological help for the children, but couldn't get that either. Brain damage caused by fetal alcohol exposure was a real possibility, but in the revolving door of caseworkers and psychologists at the time, who was going to assess these children properly? They decided that psychiatric and therapeutic treatment was urgently needed, and if they couldn't find it in the Northern Territory, they would get it in a southern state. That fateful decision to leave the Territory was made for good reason. Territory families conceded professional help was more accessible elsewhere, but they had no way of knowing it would set off a chain of events that would end in Yakamura's death and had disastrous repercussions for his family and his siblings that continue to this day. I just want to go to, I've missed this bit, which was actually by the reporter herself, and she makes some really interesting statements, so I'll just play this for you. So this is by Christine Miller.
And I'm in the Northern Territory to meet up with a foster family I first started speaking with a couple of months ago. This is a white professional couple who fostered 4 Indigenous children who had come from terribly troubled and damaged backgrounds. These children had suffered malnutrition and neglect. They had witnessed extreme alcohol-fueled domestic violence, and all 4 siblings were taken away from their family and placed with these foster carers who I've been speaking with. The issue of foster care in the top end is obviously a big news issue at the moment, but I really wanted to get past the politics and speak to people on the ground about what's happening. And what I've learned is this. This is not some sort of abstract political tool. It's much bigger than that. There are real lives at stake here. There are many good people trying to do the best thing by families and by children in absolute need. But there have been terrible mistakes made in this case. There is a boy dead who shouldn't be. There are children who have been removed from loving, safe, consistent homes and cycled through the foster care system for reasons that are really difficult to ascertain. There have been mistakes, there are lessons to learn. There are a lot of people here who want to talk about what's happened, and maybe it's time we listened.
And that's my point, that maybe it is time that we found a way to listen to what's happening to these kids. The article that she wrote goes on to say, the older children settled into their new school, and Mary and Tom engaged in child psychiatry. This is when they moved to, they talk about the southern states, but I'm assuming that actually is South Australia, Adelaide perhaps. The older children settled into their new school, and Marie and Tom engaged a child psychiatrist and paediatrician and allied health workers. They arranged play and equine therapy. One psychiatrist assessed Yakamara as having complex PTSD, chronic adjustment disorder with disturbance of conduct characterised by extreme emotional dysregulation and aggression. And if you saw his behaviour, you didn't have to be a psychiatrist to work that out either. She also indicated he was likely to be diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. At home, his behaviour worsened, and Tom and Marie worried that he was a danger to his siblings. Yakamura was placed into alternate care, and Tom and Marie assumed this would be a temporary arrangement while they found additional support. Within days, their foster allowance was stopped, and it dawned on them that he would not be returned to them. So they didn't have a conversation with him about this. They just stopped their allowance. That was the only way that they knew. Who can explain that sensitivity and that complete disregard for the people that cared for and loved this child? I don't get it. The boy was placed with new carers, an hour's drive from his siblings, and moved from the school where he'd been making progress. Why he could not have been put in a respite placement closer to his own school and sibling is unfathomable. This upset him greatly. He lost his family and now his school. We believe he suffered feelings of abandonment and rejection. And that's fair enough, I can imagine that. This was the first of many blows to follow. his foster carer said in a statement to the court. When Yakimuro's behaviour became too much for new foster parents, he bounced through placement until he ended up alone in a residential unit in one-on-one paid care organised by a local child support service. Marie and Tom, left dealing with the other 3 children, were caught between 3 agencies: Territory Families, the Child Support Service, and DCP, and relations were breaking down. Of course they were. This is one of the other issues that I can never fathom, is why when a family either moves or they move kids into state, why they can't immediately transfer that case to that state and have them look after it, I'll never know. This is one of the arguments that I've been putting forward for years, that we needed a child protection system that was federally based and not state-based. And I think sometimes some of these agencies just refuse, for reasons I cannot understand, just refuse to let go of these kids. They have a sense of ownership over them. And it's about time they dropped that, and it's about time they started to look more nationally about what is in the best interest of kids. And if they're not getting some of the services they require in certain areas, then clearly more services needed to be provided, granted, or they need to be moved to places where they are, including moving their biological family with them as well. So his behaviour became too much for new foster parents. He bounced across placements, and they were left dealing with a range of other kids. Now that the southern states' child protection workers were involved, Tom and Marie were called to a meeting about Jess, Benny and Millie. Under the Aboriginal placement principle that prioritises Indigenous carers for Indigenous children, they were informed the remaining 3 children would be taken and placed with Indigenous families. It was possible the siblings might be separated from each other. And the siblings, and we know for a fact that siblings, the connection that siblings have together is vitally important. In fact, one of the primary factors that causes siblings to feel distressed is separation from each other. In some cases, more so than the death of a parent. So to remove the kids, another issue which the department was prepared to do. Alarmed, the foster parents took immediate action to keep the children together. Within 6 weeks of them telling us they were going to take the kids and separate them, we'd moved back to the territory. Tom says that informed authorities that Yakimura should also return to the territory, but he was left behind, far from country, family, and now his siblings. He was moved to a residential care home with other young people and made the occasional trip to the Northern Territory to see family. He was doing well at sport and had a girlfriend and friends, but in the year leading up to his death, he was also getting into trouble at school, using drugs and committing offences. Suddenly, his world was rocked by the accidental death of a carer he'd bonded with, and in the days leading into Christmas, he was upset at splitting with his girlfriend. In the days before Christmas, he messaged a friend that he was about to kill himself. Attempts to alert carers at the home failed. How in the hell that can happen, I will never know. That evening, Yakimura, the 15-year-old who was loved but whose short life was marred by trauma and rejection, whose care was mismanaged by government departments charged with caring for him, was found dead in his room. At last year's inquest into Yakimura's death, the coroner was at pains to point out she was not looking to contribute individual blame. But this was an investigation into systemic failures. Many of those failings had already been accepted after internal reviews sparked by the death. Territory Families as Yakimura's custodian had apologised for deficiencies in its care. All right, okay. The Child Protection Service in the Southern States, DCP, had acknowledged it could have done more. Amala, the boy's mother, attended the inquest. Her counsel explained that she participated in the inquest in the hope that no Aboriginal child in similar circumstances would experience the pain and loneliness that Yakimura felt at the end of his life, and that no other mother would experience the grief and suffering she now feels, the coroner wrote in her findings. While noting that her inquiry focused on the care Yakimura received after his removal from his parents, she also touched on the wider social context illuminated in Professor Megan Davis' 2019 Family Report, Is Culture, which analyses the impact of colonialisation and intergenerational trauma on Aboriginal people. And as I said at the beginning, this is the issue that we need to be focusing on, and we certainly need to be doing more research around and finding ways to work with informed trauma and to understand how to work with kids that have been traumatised. This trauma manifests itself in behaviour they are regularly reviewed as a reason to remove children. Davis wrote, referring to literature that argued that while substance abuse, mental health issues and poverty may exacerbate the effects of intergenerational trauma, the root cause of this trauma was colonialisation and its subsequent effect. The coroner noted that some children are not able to remain with their birth families. The reasons for that can be complex, but are often related to the trauma that generations of Aboriginal people have experienced since colonisation displaced them from country and family. And I think you have to be a moron to deny that. She had no doubt that Amala's own trauma affected her ability to protect her children, an issue on which Amala had shown great insight. Marie adds, we kept asking for help, and all they could do was try to send us off to another parenting course, like it was our bad parenting that was to blame. And I hear and see that from parents all the time, that it's your parenting that is at fault, not the fact that you need to deal with a whole range of other issues, or that you yourself were placed in care as a child and the department taking responsibility for any abuse that might have occurred to you while you were in their care. Tom and Maria left the inquest halfway through. They say they went into the coronial process thinking their efforts would be acknowledged, but we were slammed, Tom says. The first very clear inconsistencies in the role of Yukumura's mother, they wrote. There are many issues facing Aboriginal people regarding the impact of the invasion of their land and subsequently the erosion of their culture. Hear, hear. The role that the parents played in not caring for their children is vital in understanding the breakdown of the law and of social responsibility and the impact of that on many of the children we see who are not being cared for. Finally, they're still frustrated at the missed opportunities to have a broader examination of the foster care system in a way that actually helps children. And they're cautious about speaking because their lives are still entwined with the kids. After returning to the top end, Territory families let their authorisation as carers lapse, thrusting Millie and Benny back into the care system. How can you explain that? How can you explain that? They say Millie has been through over 10 placements since leaving them, but is now back with them because she keeps running away. They'd love to have Benny back too. They look at Jess, the little girl so distressed she was pulling her hair out with hope. Now an adult, she has a job and a life. Then she thinks of Jess and looks over to Millie. A large photograph of Yukumura is on the wall, part of a shrine, and her mind turns to Benny, now living with another family. She hasn't lost hope, but he will one day come home. We love these kids. How could we regret having them in our lives? So I'd be most interested in any comments that you care to make around any of that. I apologise for it taking so long, but it is an important issue, and it's about time we as a country focused and found a way to deal with the intergenerational abuse that we've caused Indigenous people. I believe the Voice is part of that way forward, and we need to have a better understanding as to what these families go through. Now, this isn't about making an excuse for bad behaviour. It isn't making an excuse for drug addiction, family violence, mental health issues, whatever, which are often caused by those things. It is about finding also a way to deal with the trauma that these kids have received so that they can grow up to be functioning adults. And unless we find that answer, this cycle is just going to continue to evolve, and that there will be more and more of these types of circumstances. And then I have to take my hat off to people like Marie and Tom, people that work hard, older people, in fact, in this case, who've worked hard to ensure that these kids were safe. And then they go to a system hoping that that system will at least acknowledge that they've done some good work and then be criticised for it. But no one within the department takes responsibility for any of the damage that they have done, for their inability to be able to understand intergenerational trauma and their inability to work with the kids. Like they couldn't find appropriate services where they were. Maybe part of the answer is to ensure that some of these remote communities get the services that they need, in preference to our own white communities, our own suburbs, that what they need is the help that we can get whenever we need it, but they need that help and assistance as well. And maybe that'll put a bit of a dent in the continuation of the abuse that kids encounter in Indigenous communities. So I don't know what you think of all of that, but I'd be most interested to find out. You can contact me on this email address. And if you want to be notified of any further emails, you can subscribe to my channel and ring the bell. And I can only say that think about what we've talked about. What does it mean to you? If you've got any answers, or would you like to ask some questions, or even if you'd like to come onto my channel and talk about some of these issues, I'd be more than happy to have you on. What do you think? Let me know, and we can have a conversation. Take care, look after yourselves, and be safe.